You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining me this morning. We saw a surge in auto sales in the last few months, but what can we expect from May's month-end results? We're joined by Tom Kondrat, who is the global lead for advanced analytics at Urban Science, to help us unpack April and May's trends ahead of the results coming out in early June. So Tom, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us once again on the show. Very much appreciate it. And so what were some of the key drivers in April surge sales that we saw?
Yeah, in early April, we saw it come in like a lion and it went out like a lamb. So the first half of the month, sales were exceeding even March's stellar results. And as consumers flocked to buy in advance of any tariff impacts, both pricing or inventory shortage related. And so as the month progressed, I think this kind of sense of normality kicked in. You know, the manufacturers were really advertising how many of their products were manufactured in the US and how they weren't going to raise prices. And so by the end of the month, we returned to kind of an average kind of sales rate, as it were. And we did see certain segments really explode. We saw large SUV and minivan sales up 40% in April. As a lot of that in the data that we're seeing suggested, you know, those consumers that are really sensitive to not having a car, just concerned about getting that vehicle before their road trips for the summer and that kind of thing, really spurred those consumers that were really, you know, conscious of not having enough inventory on the ground. But as we've, you know, we ended April and we've come into May, it's been much more of a normal kind of sales pace so far.
Okay. I've spoken to some dealers around the country, and they felt as though sales happen to be way off from their perspective. And of course, this isn't scientific, but they just feel as though it's not where it needs to be, even for this time of year. Looking outside the box of the early April sales surge and what March brought in the last couple of weeks, they just feel as though the deals aren't there, and so it seems as though maybe it's kind of taking its toll now, right?
Yeah, by our estimates, over 200,000 sales were pulled ahead in March and April.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so these sales that are out there now are kind of the trickle after that huge flurry of sales activity, right? So I think part of that might just be in relation to those 2 months that were so incredibly hot. That normal might feel a bit slow. But I can say that in the macro national level data, we're seeing so far the sales pace on a SAR type basis is very comparable to May of last year.
Okay. Yeah, that gives
so
a good idea.
I think when the month sales numbers are in, we'll see the sales up about 6% over last year. However, we've got 2 additional calendar days this year in May and 1 additional sales day. So that will produce kind of an average or a SAR relative to last year.
Sure. Are EV sales down, and what percentage of the EVs sales or I should say, what percentage of the sales out there are EVs?
Yeah, EV sales are going berserk. They're really all over the map. And here's a little data point for April. Hybrid sales for April were up 64% year over year.
Wow.
While ICE sales and battery electric sales were only up 4% each in April. So really just, hybrid sales are off the charts. Battery electric sales for May are up a modest 3% so far this month, while ICE sales are down about 4%.
Okay. And how are the current legislative changes impacting EV sales?
Yeah, the Congress has been busy the last couple of weeks. It's good to see our tax dollars at work. And there we've got the Congress has been active passing really two major events happen, let's say. Um, the first major event was that Congress has voted to terminate the California Advanced Clean Cars 2 emissions regulation.
Okay.
And there's been a total of 12 states plus DC that have signed on to that regulation that will phase out ICE sales in those states that have
Right.
signed on to that
Right.
by 2035.
Right.
But what's not talked about quite as much is that that regulation is scheduled to go into effect in the 2026 model year, regulating that sales in those states be at least 35% zero emission vehicle, which are essentially battery electrics or hydrogen vehicles. And plug-in hybrid vehicles also satisfy that regulation.
Okay.
And those 12 states are only at about 18% of their retail sales being vehicles that comply with that regulation. So they have about a little under halfway to go to meeting the 2026 model year regulations,
Okay.
which is a very considerable gap to clear.
Yeah, boy, that's for sure. That's incredible. So, what were some of the top performing brands and models out there?
Well, some of the obviously you've got all these battery electric only companies that are selling considerable volumes in those CARB states.
Yeah.
But pretty much the more traditional OEMs that sell a mix of vehicles, none of them are close to complying with those kinds of CARB numbers. And
Sure.
let me just give you a couple more interesting numbers, if you
Sure.
will.
Sure.
California, right? So the state that is really driving this. California's retail sales for battery electric and plug-in hybrid are about 26% right now.
Wow.
So even California is at least roughly 9 points below the 2026 model year
Right.
regulation. Colorado's at 24% and Washington's at 22%. But there's several states that are only in the single digit. So they have to go from New York State has to go from 9%, which is what they're at for the first quarter of this year, up to 35%. So just a massive gap as it stands from the first quarter of this year to that regulation mandated number.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. I mean, to think that
So
they're going to make up that gap.
right, right. So, this will be a very important and interesting story to watch. This will affect dealers that sell into those states. This will affect the OEM in very significant ways, as if they've all been, building up their capacity to satisfy that regulation. And some of them have been doing it with plug-in hybrids. Some have been going straight to battery electrics. But this, whatever happens related to the Congress and the administration that we anticipate will sign that, and then I would also anticipate it, some kind of court challenge or something like that, as the state of California has promised. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds over the coming months and the rest of the year.
Well, that's for sure. All eyes are on California. That's for sure. How are tariffs impacting the industry on a bigger scale?
Yeah. So far this month, I would say that the tariff story has kind of been neutralized, really.
Okay.
And reading what some manufacturers have released, some have said that they're anticipating the tariff questions will be resolved this summer. Others predict that it won't be. So that remains to be seen. But in terms of consumer activity, May is looking kind of like last year's May, largely speaking, in terms of the sales volume that's coming in. So I think that the news cycle, there'll be ebbs and flows to it. I think, what we're seeing in the data suggests that people are buying at rates that are similar to past years. What remains for the rest of the year, I think, will largely be driven by what the administration says and does, and kind of the manufacturer's response to that.
Yeah, for sure. What are you anticipating with May's numbers when they shake out?
Yeah. So we would anticipate a SAR of around 15.9 million,
Okay.
with sales being up about 6% year over year due to the 2 extra calendar days and 1 extra selling day.
Okay. Okay. And then in terms of June, what are your anticipations for June?
Well, June is still TBD. I think let's see what the May numbers produce for the end of the month.
Yeah.
But I think the major question for June will largely be determined by the available inventory. All of the numbers that we're seeing suggest that inventory is getting supplies is shrinking.
Right.
And I think that the dealers and the manufacturers, they'll respond to that with pricing, kinds of reactions. I think we'll see a tightening of the belt in terms of incentives. There's only been a couple of manufacturers that have announced significant price changes.
Right.
So I think between now and the end of June, most likely what will occur is that you'll see, just less and less incentive offerings, and the dealers will have less inventory to cut deals with.
And then you've got some OEMs that have come out, like Hyundai, that said we're not going to be increasing prices at all at this time, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is talk related to kind of their MSRP and their standard pricing, right?
Yeah.
I think incentives always change in the industry.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we'll see the margins kind of change. The 0% or the financing deal might change, and the incentives on the hood will change.
Sure.
But in terms of base pricing, certainly some manufacturers have given some encouragement to the consumers out there that they don't intend to change their base pricing.
Sure. What should those in the industry do to prepare for the market stabilizing?
Well, I think all of the manufacturers would love to have a resolution to the tariff question.
Yeah.
Right. So in the short term, there is some shifting of production. There's been some shifting of the overseas vehicles, but there's not a lot that they can do short term. Right.
Yeah.
So I think short term, I think you'll just see creative advertising. I mean, it's really been encouraging to see, really almost all of the manufacturers touting the vehicles that they manufacture here in the United States. And that's been kind of a major brand campaign that we've seen really across the board.
That's right.
So I think you're going to see probably more of the same, and just the manufacturers exploring, what they can do in terms of pricing. I think one other thing, if the Congress comes together with the House and the Senate versions of the tax bill, it will be very interesting to see what happens with the tax changes that are proposed in that bill.
Sure.
From everything related to tax deductibility on interest payments on vehicles manufactured in the U.S. To a change in the tax policy for EVs and hybrids. Adding kind of an annual registration type tax on those vehicles to what happens with the $7,500 EV federal tax rebate, which in the House bill is scheduled to end at the end of this year.
Yeah, that's going to have some impact, I think, for sure. There's no question that's going to be a game changer for many EVs buyers out there, right?
It will be a major game changer, both for the OEMs, for dealers.
Yeah.
I think that, the dealers that I've talked to, just did not want the rug pulled out from under them with a quick cancellation of that EV rebate. And I think in the House version of the bill, they've proposed that would phase out at the end of the year,
Yeah.
which seems like pretty ample time to deal with any kind of inventories that they have currently.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
But EV battery electric sales so far this year are up 15%.
That's good.
And I think if you see that phase out by the end of the year, then I think you'd probably see a rate, accelerated. You might get up to 20 or 25%
Sure.
increase, for the second half of the year as folks that are interested to be in market would act quickly. But then you'll probably see for the next year a steadying, kind of a flattening out of the growth. And over time, we still anticipate probably by the year 2030 or 2031, you'll see battery electric vehicle sales exceed hybrids, because in the data that we see, the total cost of ownership is significantly lower on a maintenance standpoint for battery electric vehicles.
Okay.
And as the technology improves, as the range improves,
Sure.
as the convenience charging improves, all of that long term will make the total cost of ownership of battery electric vehicles really attractive. And one day you won't need the kinds of incentives that we
That's right.
we see today.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. And of course, with the Chinese now introducing a 5-minute full charge, the technology just continues to get better and better. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised when we wake up one day and we see there's a 100,000 mile, battery out there, right? And then of course,
Yes.
that just puts, the cap on this, right?
Exactly, right. As range increases, as the battery chemistry changes,
Yeah.
GM's made some major announcements about their battery chemistry and the new kinds of technology as one example. Ford as well, and really across the board, manufacturers are making innovations,
Yeah.
driving the technology forward. And at the end of the day, when the product becomes more convenient and more cost effective,
Yep.
it will be a natural consumer choice and a very in-demand product. And right now what we see is very localized demand. We see it in places like California or in major metro areas, but not yet broadly adopted across the country.
Right.
And that's going to be a major story for the next couple of years as the technology improves, as the offerings get more affordable,
Yep.
faster charging. That's the direction that it is all going in.
Yeah, I agree. Tom Kondrat, who is the global lead for advanced analytics at Urban Science. Thank you so much for stopping by CBT News. Very much appreciated. It's always great catching up with you, and stay well until our next visit. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.